Get out of my bank." The words cracked through the air like a whip. Heads turned. Conversations froze. At the center of the lobby, a woman in a dark blazer slammed a phone receiver down with one hand and pointed the other straight at the black woman in the blue sweater. Her face was flushed with fury, jaw locked, eyes blazing like she had already won. Behind her, two uniformed security officers stood like statues, their shoulders squared, their stares fixed on the same target. Around them, a cluster of clients and clerks stopped mid-motion, caught in the sudden storm. The air wasn't quiet anymore, it was charged, vibrating with tension, with judgment. And in that storm stood her, the woman in blue, still, silent, calm, her hair pulled back, her expression unreadable, her gaze steady as stone. She didn't flinch when the finger nearly touched her face. She didn't fold when the crowd began to murmur. She simply stood, every breath measured, as if anchored to the floor itself. The manager's voice rose again, sharp and venomous. "Security, remove her immediately. She doesn't belong here." Those words "doesn't belong" fell heavy, like chains tossed into the room. A phrase rehearsed, weaponized, meant to cut. People shifted uncomfortably. A young man near the waiting chairs lifted his phone, the red light of his camera quietly blinking. An older woman clutched her purse tighter, eyes darting between anger and shame. The two officers stepped closer. One adjusted his belt, the other flexed his hands, ready to drag her out. But she didn't move, didn't break, didn't beg. Her silence spoke louder than any protest could have, because she had been here before. Not in this exact lobby, but in rooms just like it, polished marble floors, tall glass walls, the same accusing eyes. At 22, fresh out of school, she walked into a bank with her first commission check, only to be told her account needed extra verification. At 30, she was asked to prove 3 times over where her down payment came from. Now, years later, the scene replayed like a cruel echo. Same script, same verdict, different day. And yet, in this very moment, her calm was no weakness. It was a weapon. The manager slammed the desk with her palm. "You're wasting everyone's time! Get out now before I call the police." A ripple of gasps ran through the crowd. Phones began to rise higher. Someone whispered, "She didn't even do anything." Another muttered, "This looks bad." But the woman in blue didn't answer. Not yet. She simply turned her head, just slightly, eyes sweeping the room as if to take in every witness, every breath, every judgment that had just been spoken into existence. Her silence pressed against the walls like thunder held back. "And before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if you believe in dignity and justice, hit like and subscribe. These stories spark change. And we're glad you're here." Now back to her. She drew a quiet breath, and for the first time her lips parted. Not loud, not frantic, just steady. "Call who you want," she said. "But remember this moment, because 10 minutes from now, everything you think you know about this bank will change." The marble floor gleamed beneath the fluorescent lights, but she didn't dress to match it. No designer heels, no logo bag swinging from her shoulder, no diamond watch to catch the eye, just a pale blue sweater, dark jeans, and shoes practical enough to blend into the line of everyday clients. If you walked past her, you might think she was a teacher, a nurse, maybe someone stopping by on her lunch break. That was intentional. She carried no entourage, no banker's briefcase, only a slim folder tucked under her arm, and a calmness in her stride that belonged to someone who had nothing to prove. She had walked through doors like these for decades, and she knew exactly what to expect. The teller hadn't asked questions, just glanced at her ID, scanned her card, and pointed her toward the manager's desk in the private client section. For a moment, it almost seemed normal. But normal never lasted long when she wore simplicity as her armor. The manager spotted her immediately, noticed the absence of a glossy handbag, the lack of glitter, the quiet confidence. To that woman, those weren't markers of strength, they were red flags. And within seconds, the judgment began. But here's the truth. The woman in blue didn't stumble in by accident. She didn't misread the sign on the glass door. She wasn't lost. She was here on purpose. She had built companies brick by brick, endured boardrooms where men twice her age tried to talk over her, weathered acquisitions where her skin color always entered the negotiation before her resume did. And when the numbers grew, when her holdings spread from coast to coast, She decided she'd never shield herself with labels again. Not Gucci, not Prada, not even the armor of a tailored suit. If they couldn't respect the woman without the costume, then the costume wasn't worth wearing. And so here she was, standing in a lobby she technically owned, in clothes that looked ordinary, and in silence that looked fragile, though in truth it was sharper than steel. Across the room, the crowd shifted. A young bank clerk whispered to a colleague, "She doesn't look like a high-value client." A man in a tailored gray suit muttered under his breath, probably trying to fake it. Their words weren't private. They never are. They were meant to sting, meant to push her into defending herself. But she didn't. She just stood, calm, listening. And as she stood there, another memory surfaced, uninvited. 23 years old, sitting in a folding chair outside a branch in Atlanta. Back then, she had worn her best Navy dress, clutching her first commission check, only to be told the account needed further review. She had sat there for hours, humiliated, waiting for approval that never came. That night, she swore to herself, next time, she would own the building they tried to lock her out of. Now, years later, that promise had come full circle. This wasn't just a branch, this was her branch. But no one here knew it yet, and that was exactly how she wanted it. Because when the truth finally landed, it wouldn't need her to shout. It would speak for itself. The manager's heels clicked against the marble as she strode forward, voice already sharp. Identification isn't enough. Where did this money come from? She didn't ask. It sounded more like an accusation. Each word dipped in suspicion. The clerk beside her folded his arms, shaking his head as though the verdict had already been written. "You know how many scams we deal with?" he muttered just loud enough for the room to hear. Walk-ins, flashing black cards they probably found online. Always the same story. The woman in blue didn't move. Her folder stayed tucked under her arm, her shoulders square. The words bounced off her like hail on glass, loud, stinging, but incapable of leaving a mark. The manager leaned closer, her perfume sharp, her smile thinner than the edge of the pen in her hand. "Be honest with yourself. You don't belong in this lounge. And if you make this harder, I'll have no choice but to escalate." From the far corner, one of the security guards adjusted his tie and stepped forward, posture rigid. The other followed, slow, deliberate, as though approaching a criminal instead of a client. Their footsteps echoed against the marble, heavy and theatrical. "Ma'am, please cooperate," the taller one said, though his tone lacked courtesy. It was less a request, more a prelude to force. The audience shifted uneasily. A teenager waiting with his mother nudged her sleeve, whispering, "She didn't even do anything." The mother pressed her lips tight, not answering. The clerk at the counter smirked, enjoying the spectacle. "Honestly, you're wasting our time. If you can't provide proof of funds, just walk out before this gets ugly." Ugly. The words stung the air. It wasn't policy, it was prejudice dressed up as procedure. The woman in blue drew a slow breath. Her eyes lowered to the polished floor, then lifted back to the manager's face. She said nothing. Not yet. But her silence only seemed to provoke more cruelty. A man in a charcoal suit, clearly another client, scoffed as he passed by. $500,000? Dressed like that? Come on." His chuckle rattled like coins in an empty jar. He brushed her folder with the edge of his hand as if to knock it loose, then kept walking without a glance back. The room hummed now not with business, but with judgment. Phones buzzed. A few cameras tilted higher. The audience was forming, though most didn't even realize they had become part of a play. The manager straightened, emboldened by the guard's presence. She raised her voice so the entire lounge could hear. "This is not a shelter. This is a bank. And if you can't prove where your money comes from, you're not a client, you're a liability." Gasps rippled across the marble hall. A woman near the espresso machine shook her head in disbelief. Someone whispered, "She didn't deserve that." The security guard stepped even closer, his shadow stretching over the woman in blue. His hand hovered near her arm, fingers twitching like he couldn't wait for the signal to grab. And still, she didn't flinch. She had been called worse, treated worse, doubted longer. And every insult they threw at her now only confirmed one thing: this test was working. Because the truth wasn't in what she carried. It was in how they chose to treat her when they thought she carried nothing. Her lips curved not into a smile, but into a line sharp enough to cut. And the storm pressed closer. The security guard's hand hovered just inches from her shoulder. The manager's voice still echoed against the marble walls, sharp and triumphant, as if humiliation itself could be policy. Yet the woman in blue didn't react. Not a word, not a step, not a flinch. She simply breathed slow, even, measured. Her stillness unsettled the room more than an outburst ever could. It was the kind of calm that didn't bend to pressure, the kind that whispered without speaking. "You don't decide my worth." The guard cleared his throat, expecting resistance, maybe even a plea. When none came, his fingers twitched, unsure whether to retreat or seize. The hesitation was visible, awkward, a crack in the performance of authority. Across the room, a clerk muttered under his breath, "Why isn't she saying anything?" The silence stretched, thick, heavy. It pressed on the chest like weight, and in that silence, memories resurfaced. She remembered being 26, sitting across from a loan officer who never looked her in the eye, his gaze fixed on the papers as he labeled her high risk. She had brought collateral worth more than the loan itself, yet it hadn't mattered. He never saw her, only the color of her skin. She remembered 32, standing in another bank lobby, this time with investors by her side. They watched her get pulled aside for a routine check, while her white colleagues passed without a glance. She had smiled then, too, calm, unbothered, while the anger simmered quietly beneath. And now here she stood again, older, sharper, far more powerful, but still faced with the same script, same accusations, same shadows. Only difference this time, she was prepared. The guard finally spoke, his tone uneasy. "Ma'am, I'm asking you one more time. Cooperate, or we'll have to escort you out." Her eyes shifted, slow and deliberate, from his hand to his face. She didn't blink, didn't look away, just held his gaze until the words dried in his throat. The manager tried to fill the silence with venom. "She's a fraud. Everyone can see it. Look at her dressed like that, thinking she belongs here." But instead of sparking agreement, the words landed differently this time. A murmur ran through the onlookers. Doubt, discomfort. The room was beginning to question not the woman in blue, but the accuser herself. And still she didn't answer, because her silence was not surrender. It was strategy. Every second she refused to break, the weight of their cruelty grew heavier on their own shoulders. The cameras caught more. The whispers spread wider. The tension shifted inch by inch. She straightened slightly, enough to reclaim the air around her, and folded her hands over the slim folder she carried. Her voice had not yet entered the fight, but her posture declared one thing: this is not fear. This is patience. The manager scoffed, frustrated by the lack of reaction. "Fine, call the police. Let them deal with this nonsense." But the woman in blue stayed silent, anchored, immovable, because when the storm breaks, the loudest one in the room is never the one left standing. A faint red glow cut through the marble light. It came from the corner, where a young man in a gray hoodie raised his phone just high enough to capture the scene. His hand trembled, but not from fear, from urgency. He whispered to the woman beside him, "People need to see this." Across the lobby, an elderly woman pressed her cane against the floor, shaking her head. "This isn't right," she said aloud, her voice low but steady. She wasn't talking to anyone in particular, yet the words landed in the silence like a gavel. The manager snapped her head toward the man with the phone. "Turn that off. This is private property. You have no right to film here." But it was too late. Others had noticed. Two teenagers waiting by the ATM pulled their phones from their pockets. A middle-aged father carrying a toddler tapped record without hesitation. Screens rose like lanterns, capturing every word, every gesture, every injustice that filled the air. The guard stiffened. One muttered under his breath, "This is getting out of hand." The woman in blue didn't move. She didn't need to. The witnesses were moving for her. From behind the counter, a junior clerk barely in her 20s glanced nervously at her computer screen, then back at the scene unfolding in front of her. Her lips parted as if to speak, then closed again. Finally, she pushed her chair back and stood. "Her name's in the system," she blurted, voice cracking but loud enough to be heard. "I saw it this morning. She has an account here." The room froze for a second. All eyes turned toward her. The manager's face twisted, red blotches creeping up her neck. "Sit down," she hissed. "You don't know what you're talking about." But the damage was done. The whisper of truth had entered the room, and it lingered. The young clerk's hands trembled as she clutched the edge of the desk. "I do know. I logged it myself." Gasps rippled through the crowd. A man near the espresso machine muttered, "So why is she being treated like this?" The manager's voice rose, shrill and desperate. Because she's lying. Because people like her come in here every week, trying to scam the system. And if you all don't step back, you're interfering with bank security protocol. But her words didn't carry the same weight anymore. Not with so many eyes recording, not with the tremble in her tone. The woman in blue remained silent, her face unreadable, her presence calm. Yet the silence wasn't hers alone now. It was joined by the hush of witnesses holding their breath, by the quiet rebellion of cameras raised high, by the unmistakable shift in the air. And in that quiet, the truth began to grow louder than any accusation. One boy near the entrance turned to his mother, voice clear as day. Why are they trying to throw her out if she's really a client? The mother didn't answer. She didn't need to. The question was enough. The lobby's hum grew louder, a mix of whispers, camera clicks, and quiet gasps. Yet the manager didn't falter. Instead, she doubled down, her heels striking the marble as if each step could drown out doubt. "She's not a client," she barked, pointing an accusatory finger. "She's a con artist, and she's wasting everyone's time." The crowd stirred. Some frowned. Others shook their heads. But before anyone could speak, another voice entered the storm. A man in a tailored navy suit pushed through the side door behind the counter. Assistant Branch Director Robert Klein, older, stiffer, his gray tie knotted tight. His presence carried weight, the kind meant to silence staff and reassure clients. "What's happening here?" he asked, tone clipped, eyes narrowing at the woman in blue. The manager gestured wildly. "This woman claims to be a client. She's not verified. I've already called security." "Oh." Robert's gaze traveled slowly from the manager to the woman in blue. His lips pursed, a line of judgment forming before he even spoke. "Do you have proof of funds?" The woman in blue didn't answer. She stood steady, her silence heavier than stone. Robert exhaled sharply, shaking his head. "You see? This is what I mean. Fraudulent behavior. They come in, they flash some fake card, and they think we won't notice. Well, not today." He turned toward the guards, his hand cutting through the air like a blade. "Remove her, now." The guards shifted, inching closer. One tightened his grip on his belt, the other adjusted his stance. The weight of their bodies pressed in, ready to seize, phones lifted higher. The young man in the hoodie whispered into his mic. "They're about to drag her out." The comment section on his live stream lit up in real time, though no one in the lobby knew it yet. The junior clerk who had spoken earlier took a step forward, her voice shaking. "Mr. Klein, I told you her name is in the system. She's valid." Robert's eyes snapped to her, cold and cutting. "Enough. You're new here. Don't embarrass yourself by defending strangers." Strangers. The word rang sharp, deliberate, meant to sever any sense of belonging. The woman in blue blinked slowly, her expression still calm, still unreadable. Her silence was deafening, and it unnerved Robert more than any argument could have. So he raised his voice, filling the room with authority that wasn't his to claim. "She doesn't belong here. She's a fraud, a thief. This bank doesn't serve people like her." Gasps tore through the crowd. The elderly woman with the cane clutched it tighter, eyes flashing with fury. The boy near the entrance frowned deeply, whispering to his mother again. "Why are they talking to her like that?" The tension thickened. The marble lobby no longer felt like a place of business, it felt like a courtroom, and the verdict had already been declared. But the woman in blue remained still, silent, patient. Because she knew every cruel word spoken now was fuel, every insult, every order barked, every false accusation. They weren't tearing her down. They were building the very stage on which she would rise. And when she finally chose to speak, no one in that room would forget it. The order cracked through the air like a gavel. "Remove her, now." The taller guard stepped forward first, his shadow falling heavy across the woman in blue. His hand hovered again, but this time, it didn't hesitate. Fingers closed around the strap of her folder, tugging sharply. The papers inside shifted, edges scraping against the leather. "Sir, that's her property," the junior clerk cried out, voice high, but Robert silenced her with a glare that could freeze fire. The manager smirked, arms folded, as though justice itself had just walked into the room on her command. "Frauds don't get to keep fake documents," she spat. "We'll be turning that over to the authorities." The guard yanked harder. The folder slipped from the woman's grip and hit the floor with a flat, humiliating slap. Pages scattered across the marble, contracts and forms sliding like discarded scraps. Gasps rippled through the lobby. Phones zoomed in. Someone whispered, "This is theft." Still, she did not bend. She bent down slowly, gathering the papers with calm, deliberate movements. Her fingers steady, her breath even. No rush, no panic, as if time itself was hers to command. But the insult wasn't finished. The shorter guard reached for her arm, his grip firm, possessive, an attempt to drag her toward the doors. "You're being detained for non-compliance," he announced, his voice rehearsed like a line from a manual. The elderly woman with the cane raised it slightly, her voice breaking through the crowd. She hasn't done anything wrong. But her protest was swallowed by the manager's venom. "Call the police," she barked at Natalie, the clerk standing near the landline. "Tell them we have a suspected thief attempting to access restricted funds." The word thief shattered the room like glass. Cameras tilted higher. Fingers tapped furiously on screens. The live stream counter climbed. Witnesses weren't just watching anymore, they were documenting. The injustice was no longer confined to the marble walls. The woman in blue straightened as the guard's hand tightened around her arm. She looked down at it, then up at him, her voice quiet but razor sharp. "Remove your hand." The guard scoffed. "Or what?" Her gaze didn't flicker. "Or you'll regret touching me in a place that doesn't belong to you." The guard hesitated. Just a fraction of a second, but enough for the silence to sharpen. The crowd leaned in, waiting, sensing that something beneath the surface was about to break. Robert filled the pause with fire. "She's a fraud," he declared to the room. "And if we have to drag her out, so be it. Let this be a warning to anyone who thinks they can walk into this bank and pretend to be something they're not." The words echoed like a verdict, cruel, final. But in the stillness that followed, it wasn't the woman in blue who looked small. It was them, the manager with her trembling fury, the guards with their forced bravado, the assistant director shouting louder than reason. Because in that silence, in that calm, in that unflinching gaze, everyone watching began to sense it. Something wasn't right. Something was about to turn. The guard's hand still gripped her arm, tight, insistent. The folder lay half-gathered at her feet, papers like wounded soldiers across the marble. The manager smirked, convinced the battle was won. Robert's chest swelled with authority he thought was unshakable. And then she moved, not to struggle, not to shout, but to reach, slowly, deliberately, into the pocket of her sweater. The guard stiffened, expecting resistance. Instead, she drew out a sleek black phone. She tapped the screen once, calm as ever, and lifted it to her ear. Her voice was low, even surgical. "It's happening." On the other end, a woman's voice answered instantly. Clear, professional, prepared. "Understood. Protocol is live. Do you want me to escalate?" The guard blinked. The manager frowned. Robert's smirk faltered. Around them, cameras zoomed in closer, capturing every syllable. The woman in blue didn't raise her tone. She didn't need to. "Lock the time. Document every word, every action, and prepare access termination." A ripple of murmurs ran through the lobby. Access termination? The phrase carried weight, unfamiliar yet final, like a switch that once flipped could never be undone. Robert barked, "What are you doing? Who are you calling? Give me that phone." He lunged a step closer, but the taller guard hesitated. Something in her voice, in her stillness, in the quiet command she carried it unsettled him. On the phone, the assistant's voice was crisp. "Everything's recorded. Internal systems engaged. Shall I inform the board?" She inhaled slowly, eyes sweeping the crowd that now stood as witness. "Not yet. Let them finish digging their hole." The manager scoffed, her laugh brittle, echoing off the glass walls. "What is this? Some act? You think calling a friend will save you?" She turned to the crowd. "She's pretending, probably calling someone to fake documents for her right now." But the crowd wasn't convinced. Not anymore. The cameras kept rolling. The silence after each of the woman's words carried more gravity than the manager's shrill protests. The guard released her arm, his confidence cracked. Robert noticed and snapped, "Don't back down, she's bluffing." Yet deep down, everyone watching felt it. This wasn't a bluff. The woman in blue lowered the phone just enough for her voice to reach the room. "You've made a mistake, and in exactly 10 minutes you'll understand how costly it island." She lifted the phone again. "Stand by for immediate execution." The assistant's reply was swift. "Standing by. Confirm when ready." She ended the call with a single tap, then bent gracefully, gathering the last of her papers with the composure of someone in no rush at all. She stacked them neatly, slid them back into the folder, and rose. Her silence was no longer emptiness. It was pressure, heavy, inevitable, the kind of silence that makes even the guilty hear their own heartbeat. And for the first time since this confrontation began, the room wasn't watching the guards, or the manager, or Robert. All eyes were on her, because though no one knew her name yet, they knew something unstoppable had just been set in motion. The folder rested firmly in her hands again. The marble floor still echoed with the insults hurled at her minutes before, but now the air had shifted, heavier, thicker, waiting. Robert cleared his throat, desperate to reclaim ground. "You're wasting everyone's time. Security, remove her now, before the police arrive." The shorter guard took a step forward, then stopped. His hand hovered, uncertain. Phones hovered higher still, capturing every second. And then she spoke. Her voice didn't rise. It cut, clean, precise. "I don't need access." The words landed like thunder wrapped in velvet. The crowd leaned in, breath held. She raised her eyes, locking them on Robert, then the manager, then sweeping across the guards. "I own this bank." Silence. Not the silence of dismissal, not the silence of disbelief, the silence of shock, the kind that swallows a room whole. The manager's smirk collapsed. Robert's jaw unhinged slightly, his authority slipping through the cracks of his composure. The guards froze, their posture unraveling, caught between duty and dawning realization. From the corner, the young man with the hoodie whispered into his phone mic, "You heard that right? She owns it. She actually owns it." Gasps cascaded through the lobby. A woman clasped her hand over her mouth. A teenager mouthed no way to his friend. The elderly woman with the cane smiled faintly, as if she'd known all along. The woman in blue didn't blink, didn't soften. She let the silence hang, let the truth settle into every corner, every camera lens, every witness's heart. "You called me a fraud," she continued, her tone still calm, almost tender in its precision. "In the very institution that signs my name at the top of its charter, you tried to strip me of dignity inside walls I built." "Oh." Her gaze hardened, pinning Robert to the floor. "And now you'll answer for it." The weight of her words didn't shout. They didn't need to. They commanded. The lobby, once hostile, was no longer theirs. It belonged to her. The words still hung in the air, "I own this bank," echoing louder than any shout could. The effect was immediate. The manager's face drained of color, the crimson fury replaced with a chalk-white panic. Her lips parted, but no words came. The smirk that had carried her through humiliation after humiliation crumbled into silence. Robert's jaw clenched tight, his eyes darting toward the cameras, then back to the woman in blue. Sweat traced a line along his temple. He looked like a man watching his career slip through his fingers in real time. The guards shifted uneasily, stepping back as if distance might shield them from the weight of her revelation. The taller one lowered his hand completely, retreating a pace. The shorter guard muttered, She owns it?" His voice cracked, thin, betraying doubt. And then came the crowd. It started with a single clap from the elderly woman with the cane, slow, deliberate, each strike of palm to palm a verdict against the injustice they had just witnessed. Another joined, then another, until the marble lobby was filled with applause, sharp and relentless, echoing off the glass and stone. Phones stayed high, recording every second. Some guests smiled, others shook their heads in disbelief, but all eyes locked on her. The young man in the hoodie spoke directly to his live stream. "Everyone watching, you just saw it. The woman they tried to throw out, she's the owner. The owner." Comments flooded his screen, disbelief turning into fury, fury turning into celebration. The junior clerk, trembling, stepped out from behind the counter and stood a little closer to the woman in blue. Her voice was stronger this time. "I told you. I saw her name in the system. I knew she belonged." The manager spun toward her, eyes wild. "Shut your mouth!" But the words fell flat. No authority remained. Because now, authority had shifted. It belonged to the woman in blue, the one who never raised her voice, never broke her calm, and yet dismantled every ounce of their false power in a single sentence. The applause grew louder, swelling like a tide. Guests cheered softly, some raising fists in solidarity, others simply nodding with pride. And for Robert, for the manager, for the guards, the realization was complete. They hadn't just mishandled a client, they had humiliated their employer. The courtroom had flipped. and they were the ones on trial. The applause still thundered, but she lifted her hand gently and the room quieted. Not because she demanded silence, but because everyone sensed the moment had shifted again. She raised her phone, tapped once, and spoke clearly, her voice steady as steel. "Carla, execute immediate termination. Robert Klein, Manager Denise Hart, Security IDs 204 and 317. Strip access. Effective now." On the other end, the assistant's reply rang sharp through the speaker. "Confirmed. Processing." A beat, then another, and then it happened. Robert's access badge buzzed red against his chest, a sharp electronic chirp echoing into the stunned lobby. He fumbled, staring at it as though the plastic itself had betrayed him. The manager's badge blinked next, flashing red before dying completely. The guards' radios crackled once, then went silent, their earpieces cutting out mid-transmission. "Wait, what?" Robert stammered, tapping his badge against the desk reader. Nothing. Dead. The manager tried hers, slamming it against the scanner. No response. Panic flared in her eyes. "This isn't possible," she barked, but her voice was brittle now, stripped of command. The guards exchanged glances, their posture broken, authority dissolved. They weren't protectors anymore, they were spectators to their own undoing. The woman in blue lowered her phone, her words slicing the air. "You tried to erase me in my own house. Now I erase you." Gasps surged through the crowd, followed by a roar of murmurs, disbelief mixing with satisfaction. A man near the entrance muttered, "She just fired them." "Right here," another whispered. "They've got nothing left. Look at their faces." The junior clerk stepped closer, her voice trembling but resolute. "They can't touch her anymore, she controls everything." The elderly woman with the cane lifted her chin proudly. And she did it without shouting once. Robert stumbled backward, the weight of finality sinking in. The manager clutched her powerless badge like a lifeline already severed. The guards shifted. No longer officers of order, just men in uniforms suddenly stripped of purpose. The woman in blue didn't smile, didn't gloat. She simply stood, calm and immovable, the embodiment of quiet justice. And in that silence, the truth was undeniable. In less than 10 minutes, she had dismantled an entire branch staff not with rage, not with chaos, but with power wielded precisely, decisively, irrevocably. The badges still blinked red, lifeless against their uniforms. Robert's shoulders slumped, his tie hanging like a noose he couldn't untie. The manager's eyes darted wildly, searching for rescue that would never come. The guards shifted awkwardly, stripped of purpose, shadows of the authority they once carried. The applause swelled again, but the woman in blue raised her hand slightly, and the lobby hushed, not because she demanded it, but because she had earned it. She stepped forward, placing the folder calmly on the marble desk. Her voice carried no tremor, no anger. It was measured, deliberate, unforgettable. "You called me a fraud. You tried to drag me out, humiliate me, erase me." She paused, letting the weight of each word fall heavy in the silence. "But I don't need to record this moment. I am the record, and you will live with the proof of your own actions." The crowd stirred, nods rippling like waves. The young man in the hoodie whispered to his phone, "That's it. That's the line." His live stream comments exploded in real time. The junior clerk stepped fully out from behind her desk, standing beside the woman in blue. Her voice trembled, but it held conviction. "I'll remember today, and I'll never stay silent again." The woman in blue turned slightly toward her, a faint acknowledgement, then back to the sea of witnesses. Her eyes scanned every phone, every face, every breath. She wasn't speaking only to those inside the branch. She was speaking to everyone beyond the glass, everyone watching through screens. Dignity is not a luxury, justice is not optional, and silence is never weakness. Today, you all saw what happens when prejudice tries to speak louder than truth. The applause returned, louder than before, shaking the marble, rattling the glass. Guests rose from their seats, some clapping, some recording, some simply standing in awe. The manager, pale and broken, whispered something under her breath. Robert looked at the floor, unable to meet any eyes. The guards lowered their heads, defeated. And through it all, the woman in blue stood steady, unchanged, unshaken, unbowed. She gathered her folder, turned toward the exit, and walked with the same quiet grace she had entered with. No entourage, no guards, no raised voice. Just silence, the kind that lingers, the kind that teaches, the kind that rewrites a room forever. Because in the end, she didn't need a clip to prove her power. She was the ending.